They circled him with guns warming like coals, laughing at the human who tripped over a loose cable, and Darius Cole tried not to laugh with them because the joke was that they thought he was the scout and he had come here to kill every last one of them before the stew at his sister's kitchen got cold. He raised his hands, smiled like a guilty tourist, and wondered which would be messier, the coming firefight or explaining to his mother why his dress shirt had new scorch marks. There was fear in his chest and affection in his pockets, and something patient and terrible sleeping behind his eyes. The station smelled like rust and cold air. Panels hung open like tired eyelids. Grav plates hummed with a heartbeat that belonged to no creature Darius had ever known. He stood in a circle of light in a docking bay that had not seen a friendly arrival in years, and the Galactic enforcers arranged themselves around him with the tired professionalism of people who believed in rules and read the manual. Their armor was the pearl gray of empty skies. Their visors reflected his raised palms and the faint grin he could not quite remove. He catalogued them as he breathed. Captain Vera, poised and watchful, with a stillness that suggested she enjoyed making the first move second. Zorik, all muscle and flex, a mountainous figure whose laughter sounded like old engines starting. Nyla, the empath, slender and inward, a person who listened with her bones. Krail, a blade of a man with a wordless history. Others too, 9 in total, each confident, each certain that a human scout had blundered into their net. Darius let his knees look soft. He counted vents and shadows and the time it took for the emergency lighting to cycle from sickly blue to softer white. He was not a scout. He was the knife. The orders had been clean as glass. Infiltrate the team, harvest their access ciphers, eliminate the unit, secure the vault hidden inside the station guts, and return to Earth with the artifact nobody would admit existed. He had read the names of those he would kill while eating a bowl of noodles that had gone cold as rain. He had thought about birthdays and small jokes and how some enemies might have made decent neighbors if galaxies had been kinder. Now he breathed deep and let the mask of the hapless human slip a little more over his face. They spoke at him, but he watched for tells. Vera with questions that nudged without pushing. Krail silent, knuckles easing on his rifle only when he saw Vera relax. Zorik with a chuckle and a remark about fragile humans who traveled with fewer spare organs than a proper being should. Nyla with a little frown, the kind that said a radio station somewhere in her head was picking up static. Darius made a show of stumbling on the same loose cable again, and Zorik laughed louder, and a few helmets tipped back just enough to show a hint of teeth. The laughter warmed the room by a degree. Good. Warmth made people slow. He let them cuff his wrists with a magnetic brace. The metal kissed his skin with the polite precision of a machine that had never once questioned its job. He let them take his visible weapons, the tidy sidearm, the knife that looked like it had never been used, the little spool of fiber line that really had been for climbing. No one asked about his boots. No one noticed the adhesive nest he left on the floor when he stumbled and caught himself with an open palm. Everyone looked at his empty holster and felt satisfied. Satisfaction is a soft pillow. Darius believed in hard pillows. The brace locked, and he swayed forward as if defeated. With his hands together he lifted a little to adjust the fit. The move looked helpless. It engaged a pressure switch hidden in the cuff seam where his thumb met the web of his hand. Somewhere behind a maintenance grate a crawler drone as small as a coin woke to a purpose it had not known it loved until that moment. It began to scuttle. Darius kept his breathing shallow. He could hear the drone only as a suggestion against the broader sound of the station heartbeat. Vera asked where his team was. Darius said he had lost them in a storm of debris. He let the lie sound like a lie. People who lie perfectly are suspicious. People who stumble over bad lies are often believed, because belief is not about truth, belief is about relief. Krail scanned the bay for hidden friends and saw none. Zorik made a joke about charging him rent for using their spotlight. Nyla tilted her head in the small way of someone hearing a grief in the next room. Darius lowered his eyes and tried to remember the way his sister's kitchen smelled when the coriander hit hot oil. They marched him into the station corridors as a group. The floors were the clean kind of dirty that comes from nothing happening for a long time. He watched reflections in the window glass and counted cameras. He let the drone keep pace behind the wall and thought about where the nerves and the power and the air spoke to one another. His path had been walked earlier in silence, when he arrived with the quiet of a roomer and mapped the skin of the station with the tenderness of a thief. He knew which vents led to dead ends and which conduits sang the loudest when power surged. He knew where to make a new night. Nyla drifted closer. He felt her regard like cool water on the back of his neck. She would taste his thoughts if he let her. He filled his mind with trivialities: the multiplication table, the lyrics of a childish song about a cat and a kettle and a spaceport full of broken umbrellas. She found annoyance and boredom and a soft worry for a mother who scolded in a language Darius had learned only halfway. She also found an edge like a razor wrapped in velvet. She pulled back. Not yet, her eyes said. Later. They reached Control 2, a room with a collapsed console and a view of the docking bay. Vera set the squad into a neat fan, field of fire overlapping so cleanly that anyone entering would become a sieve. Darius admired it. He loved competence. He also loved that competence often assumed the field would remain a field. He let his shoulders slump. He said he was hungry. Zorik said he was always hungry and patted his stomach armor as if it were a loyal pet. Even Krail smiled, though the smile had no weight. The captain questioned him again, name and origin and purpose. He gave the name on his fake badge. He named a colony that was friendly enough to pass a casual check but known for losing its paperwork. He said he was scouting for a human relief convoy that never arrived. Vera listened. She did not believe him, not fully, but belief was not her goal. She wanted the story to sit on the table long enough for her to pour tea around it. While she poured, Darius fixed his attention on the grav controls tucked under a maintenance hatch beside a burned-out screen. His drone had already found its way there, waiting for a tap that would be permission. The missing soldier's absence left a taste of iron in the air. The squad shifted, glances darting in every direction, but no one wanted to voice the thought. Something was wrong, and it was not the human scout they had taken into custody, at least not in the way they believed. Darius lowered his eyes, let his face tremble as if in fear, though inside he was laughing at the absurdity. A dozen of the galaxy's most trained enforcers, armored in technology worth more than small cities, and they were frightened because one of their own had vanished when the lights flickered. He made his breathing ragged, counted the beats of their silence, and enjoyed the space opening up between them. Silence is the first sign of weakness in a team, he thought. Silence is where suspicion grows. When he closed his eyes, he saw the briefing again. The room had been dim and filled with cigarette smoke from a handler who still believed in old habits. They had told him the mission was simple but absolute. The Galactic enforcers had become a threat not because they were cruel, but because they were incorruptible. They held technology humans wanted but would never be given. The station itself was rumored to hide the most dangerous artifact Earth had ever heard whispers of, something pulled from the edge of a dying star and locked away under alien law. Darius had been told that law was irrelevant. Remove the enforcers. Secure the artifact. Leave no trace. He had nodded, not because he agreed, but because nodding was the currency of the trade. His only private thought had been about his sister's kitchen, where coriander and garlic always drowned the taste of smoke. He liked to imagine he could go home again when all this was over, but he already knew he could not. The present returned with Zorik swearing. The brute's voice echoed like a collapsed wall falling down a well. He accused Krail of moving too slow, of failing to watch the flank. Krail did not even turn, just flexed his jaw in silence. Vera raised her hand, but the team's cohesion had already cracked a little. Darius looked around, feigning confusion, asking if the lights always behaved this way. He asked if perhaps there were vermin on the station, creatures native to its bones. He asked as if he were small and harmless. Nyla stared at him too long. She was trying to reach into him again, to listen. He filled his mind with the noise of nursery rhymes, with the song about the cat and the kettle, with a memory of rain that had nothing to do with this station. She frowned and pulled back, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. They moved deeper into the corridors, past bulkheads that groaned as though the station disliked their presence. The path curved toward the central hub, where a dim glow bled through fractured glass. Darius remembered walking this way earlier, in silence, mapping every turn and corner, marking which vents could carry his drone and which cameras still whispered their signals to a forgotten network. Now he walked with a shuffle, head bowed, wrist still technically bound though the cuff was loose enough to slip if he chose. Every step they took deeper into the station was another chance for him to peel them apart. The enforcers whispered among themselves, voices caught on private comms, but Darius had learned to read body language long before he learned to listen to voices. He saw the way Nyla glanced at Vera, then back at him. He saw the tension in Krail's shoulders, a weight not of fear but of decision. He saw how Zorik tried too hard to make his steps loud, as though sound could fight shadows. These were not strangers anymore. They were becoming a puzzle he could solve, piece by piece, until only one piece remained, and he would know how to break it. They reached a junction and paused. Vera studied the flickering map on her wrist display. She muttered about blocked corridors, about life support fluctuations. Darius pretended to peer over her shoulder, but he already knew the path better than she did. He had memorized it when his handlers drilled the floor plans into him for days. His job was not to walk but to dance, to appear clumsy while every step was rehearsed. He allowed himself a small grin and then quickly buried it under a cough. Zorik teased him for being weak-lunged. Darius muttered an apology in a trembling voice. The act fed itself. They wanted him to be afraid, and so he gave them fear, knowing it would disarm them. They split into pairs because order felt like safety and safety felt like something you could put on like a helmet and forget about. Vera sent Krail with Nyla, pairing steel with water, and took Zorik herself, because a captain always kept the loudest hammer where she could see it. Darius was assigned to two of the quieter enforcers whose names had run together in his memory during the briefings, a detail he had cultivated by never asking anyone to repeat themselves. He kept his eyes down, and his ears open and let the station breathe around them. The corridors narrowed as they moved away from the hub, built for maintenance crews with narrow shoulders and quicker hearts. Pipes ran like exposed veins, sweating chill. The lights made a watery glow, as if the station had sunk beneath an invisible ocean and the crew were fish learning to walk. Darius guided his pair down a route he had mapped earlier, not by leading but by asking stupid questions that made them choose the wrong right turns. He asked what a particular panel did, and when one stopped to explain, he intoned polite all while his drone scuttled ahead to a junction box that tasted like an artery. If the station had ever loved anyone, it had loved the people who lived long enough to know when not to touch. Darius touched everything through the drone. A trickle pulled from the grav grid. A lullaby whispered to a set of copper coils. A cooling fan stuttered, breathed, sighed. He and his pair reached a crossway where a ladder led up to a mezzanine that had probably been a worker's lounge, and he suggested they take a look because anyone hunting would check high vantage points. The enforcers nodded because it was logical, and logic is how you step into traps you built yourself. Zorik and Vera came through on the comm, voices voiced to hide nerves. Zorik joked that if they found the monster he was filing a complaint about overtime. Vera said he could file it with her after they were done surviving. Nyla reported a pressure change in the air, a feeling of a presence shifting rooms like an exhausted sleeper. Krail said nothing, which said everything. Darius smiled to himself, a small closed thing, and asked his pair if the mezzanine had a coffee machine. When they shrugged, he made a joke about needing caffeine to fuel panic. They laughed softly, a sound that told him how close they were to wanting to be told what to do. At the top of the ladder, the lounge was a museum of absence. Chairs bent like old men. A long table wore a skin of dust. Someone had left a deck of cards spread in a lost fan, and Darius brushed his finger across the table near them without leaving a mark. The enforcers scanned for heat signatures and found only their own. He tilted his head toward a hatch on the far side that ought to lead to a maintenance crawl. He was careful to make suggestions sound like deference. They crossed the lounge, boots whispering, the air rebreathed and flavorless. The hatch had once refused to open for him, and he had made it promise to do the same for others. It groaned and wedged halfway, a throat closing on a swallowed lie. One enforcer bent to force it and put a boot in the gap. Adhesive did not care about strength. It loved pressure. The boot held fast. Darius widened his eyes and suggested they leave it, perhaps try another route. Pride is a generous patron. The enforcer grunted, muscles working, and the second stepped in to help, weapon tilted away for leverage. Darius put a hand to his mouth, a nervous habit his teachers had taught him to wear like cologne. Nobody looked at his hands long enough to see the cuffs slide free. Power coughed. The grav plates tuned down like a singer losing confidence. A toolbox skated from the mezzanine corner and clanged against the far wall with a comic sincerity that made Zorik chuckle in Darius' ear through the open channel. The enforcer who was braced over the stuck hatch suddenly found himself too heavy and then too light, and his boot tore free of an adhesive that no longer had enough weight to love. Momentum threw him forward into the crawl space. The second reached to catch him, and Darius, hands folded as if in prayer, nudged the unlatched safety bar on the hatch, which fell with the fatal patience of a curtain closing between acts. For a heartbeat they were 3. Then they were 2 and a muffled sound beyond the hatch that was not a scream, exactly, more like a question asked by someone who had already guessed the answer. The second enforcer lifted the hatch bar, strain in shoulders and voice, and Darius murmured wait because rushing would surely trigger something worse. He said it with the urgency of someone who wants to help but also wants to be properly cautious. Inside, he counted down as his drone finished its work. The hatch lifted. The crawl space showed a clean run of duct, empty, the dust unmarked except for the new staggered footprints that vanished half a meter in. The enforcer whispered that he did not like cheap tricks. Darius agreed and tucked the cuff back into place with the innocence of a child smoothing a shirt collar. Panic rippled through the team when the second disappearance went across the net. Vera told everyone to hold position and report visuals. Nyla whispered that there was a shape in the corner of her mind that wore a smile and the wrong memories. Zorik said he would punch the shape if it had the courage to take on a physical form. Krail asked Nyla to keep her thoughts to herself, and his voice, always measured, carried a new edge that made Darius pinch the thread of interest and set it aside for later. Patterns bloom in their own season. He guided his remaining guard down the ladder because standing in an empty room invites stories to move in. At the bottom he suggested a detour to the power spines, a place he said would give them eyes on the station core. The enforcer agreed because he wanted an explanation he could aim at. The passage to the spines was narrow and moist. Humming structures loomed like sleeping beasts. Darius brushed his palm against a panel he had wired with a whisper earlier, and the lights in the next corridor faltered into a strobe. Bright dark, a heartbeat with its rhythm turned cruel. In the stutter light, shadows seemed to forget where to stand. Darius set his steps to the beat and let the enforcer take the lead, as any captive would. Ahead, the corridor elbows into AT where a maintenance spot waited on its charging slot, belly open like a gull swallowing a tide. The bot had been dead for years and awake for minutes. When the enforcer reached the corner, Darius said softly wait, and the enforcer, because he had been told to listen for the empath, paused just long enough for the bot to whir in greeting. He spun, weapon up, and Darius shielded his eyes in a way that made the enforcer feel competent. The bot wheezed, arms stretching like stiff flowers, and then Darius pinched a wire, and the grav came back hard. Nyla's voice broke across the calms like a stone dropped into still water. She said the human was wrong. She said the fear in him was not the fear of prey but the satisfaction of a hunter. The words echoed down the station's brittle corridors, bouncing in the helmets of those still alive. Darius lowered his head as if ashamed, but he was smiling in the shadows. The mask had lasted longer than he had expected, and masks, once they crack, make sharper edges than bare faces ever could. The enforcers pulled in tighter, weapons angled toward him, no longer toward the station's dark corners. Zorik muttered that he had known it all along, but his voice shook with nerves. Vera said nothing, and her silence was heavier than any weapon. The confrontation began with Nyla stepping forward. She told him she had touched his memories and found too many that were hollow. She told the others she had seen blood in his laughter. Darius tilted his head, letting her make her speech, because speeches buy time, and time is the only weapon he always trusted. He whispered that he never asked her to look, that peering into another soul without permission was ruder than anything he had done so far. Zorik laughed nervously, then stopped when he realized Darius was not joking. Krail shifted his stance, rifle steady, gaze locked on the human who had just been unmasked. Darius let his grin stretch wide, the grin of someone who had grown tired of play acting. He clapped his bound hands together, and the sound triggered the drone to pulse energy into the grav plates. The room tilted half a degree, then another, until the walls felt unreliable, and the ceiling suggested it might not stay where ceilings belong. The enforcers scrambled, adjusting their weight, cursing the sudden betrayal of physics. Darius used the stumble to slip free of the cuff entirely, his wrists red but his fingers nimble. He flexed them as though waking from a nap, and for a moment the squad realized the human had never been trapped at all. Vera barked orders, her voice a calm knife cutting through chaos. She told them to stabilize, to hold formation, to remember they were enforcers and not prey. Her words were strong, but they had to compete with the shifting gravity that made even standing feel like walking on a drunk man's shoulders. Darius danced between their lines, moving lightly, pretending to struggle, always keeping just beyond the sweep of their weapons. He threw himself into a corner and laughed, the sound ringing with too much joy. Zorik swore, vowing to smash him flat once they regained balance. The captain surprised him. Instead of pressing for the kill, she lowered her weapon slightly and told him to listen. She said the humans had sent him here because he was expendable. She said Earth's leaders used killers the way other governments used knives, and knives are always discarded when dull. She told him he could walk a different path, that he could join them, that he could learn what true justice meant. The others bristled at her words, but she silenced them with a hand. Darius tilted his head again, interested. For the first time, someone had spoken to him as though he had a choice. For the first time, someone suggested he was not only the weapon but the hand that held it. He almost laughed again, but the laughter died on his lips when Krail spoke. Krail revealed what no one had expected. He said he had been the one who requested Earth send an assassin. He admitted he had whispered to the right ears, trading secrets, calling in debts, until Earth's intelligence sent Darius like a storm into their ranks. His goal had never been the protection of Vera or Nyla or Zorik. His goal had been to cut out the heart of his own squad, starting with his captain. The room fell into a silence so thick the station seemed to stop breathing. Vera turned her head, slow as a tide, her visor reflecting Krail's rigid posture. Nyla gasped, almost doubling over from the surge of betrayal she felt pouring from him. Even Zorik's endless humor could not survive that revelation. The station had learned the rhythm of their fear and began to play along. Bulkheads sighed and doors considered closing at inconvenient moments. Darius let the chaos use him as a drumbeat while he ghosted from shadow to shadow, counting the survivors by the shape of their footsteps. Vera moved with economy, Zorik with a heavy stride that tried to sound brave, Nyla with a careful quiet that felt like apology, and Krail with the steady temper of a man who had already chosen which lines he would cross. The others were gone, not just missing but erased, and the air tasted lonelier for it. Krail found him first because Krail had the stubborn habit of walking straight lines in a crooked world. He stepped into a maintenance gallery bright with the blue glow of coolant traces and raised his rifle without preamble. He told Darius the offer still stood. They could carve the captain out of the squad like rot from a fruit and end this with a clean kill. Darius smiled and kept his hands open, letting Krail believe the negotiation had purpose. He asked what Krail planned to do after, how he would explain a dead captain to a corps that prized loyalty like a holy text. Krail said that truth was a matter of timing. He would reveal Vera as compromised, blame the human, and step into the vacuum as a patient hero. Darius applauded the story for its neatness, and then asked why Krail had positioned a station turret behind the bulkhead 2 meters to his left. Krail did not blink. He squeezed the trigger anyway. The barrel tore through a seam and spat fire into the space where Darius had been standing. He had moved at the first syllable of Krail's reply, the drone whispering a different set of commands to the turret brain, and the next shot bent toward its master with an obedient hum. Krail rolled as if the floor were a promise he could renegotiate. The blast burned a line across his shoulder and bit metal out of the wall. He came up snarling, blood dark on armor, and congratulated Darius for being impossible. Darius bowed without grace and said he hated to be predictable. Then he kicked the coolant line Krail had chosen for cover and let a sheet of icy fog rush between them like an argument neither wanted to finish. They parted without decision because the station insisted. A blast door shuttered down between them, a slamming lid on a pot gone to boil. Darius took the leftmost passage and let the fog hide his direction. He could hear Zorik on the comm, booming and trying to be light, telling Nyla a joke about a ghost and a bar and a drink he could not afford. Nyla did not laugh. Her voice had become a quiet iron. She said she was going to stop the human, not by shooting him, but by opening him like a book and tearing out the page with his secret name. Vera told her no, not yet, but a captain can order only what the soul will obey, and Nyla was already walking toward the gallery where Krail and Darius had just danced. Darius met her there because he had always intended to. He owed her something, maybe a choice, maybe an apology for using her heart as a tool. She stepped into the blue glow with her helmet off, eyes red from more than smoke, and asked him to stand still. He said he could manage that for a minute. Zorik burst in behind her and cursed at the sight of the two of them facing each other like actors who had forgotten their lines. Darius told Zorik to give them a moment because adults were talking. Zorik lifted his rifle and said his jokes were running out, so he would prefer to solve this with old-fashioned violence. Nyla raised a hand and asked him to wait. To his credit, he did. The last corridor to the vault stretched like a throat swallowing them into silence. Darius walked at the front without pretending to be restrained now, his footsteps soft and steady, the drone whispering through the wires above like a ghost cheering him onward. Behind him Vera followed, her rifle ready, her eyes sharper than they had been since the mission began. She had lost her squad and she had lost her trust, but she had not lost her purpose, and that made her more dangerous than all the weapons still scattered through the station. She did not speak, and he did not speak, because words were the one thing fragile enough to break this fragile march before its time. The vault door rose from the floor like a giant coin buried in the earth. Its metal was etched with scripts either of them could read, languages older than either of their governments. Darius had seen its plans in the briefing, had been told that what lay inside was not just valuable but essential, a shard of something taken from the edge of a dying star, a device that could bend energy into forms no empire had ever imagined. Earth's leaders wanted it because wanting was the only language they understood. Vera wanted it sealed forever because she had sworn to protect it. Between them stood the human killer who had learned to love the dance, and the captain who had learned to command even when command had become pointless. She broke the silence first, her voice steady but low. She told him he did not have to do this. She told him he could walk away from the orders of men who would discard him as soon as his usefulness ended. He asked her if she believed that walking away was something men like him could ever do. She said everyone had a choice, even when the choice was small. He laughed at that, a tired laugh that came from the part of him Nyla had touched. He admitted that for a second he had believed her, and that second felt heavier than all the lies he had carried in his life. Then he touched the panel, and the vault began to wake. The air grew hot, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Lights chased each other across the ancient metal, and the groan of machinery long asleep filled the hall. Vera lifted her weapon and told him to step away. Darius smiled because she was still a captain even without a crew. He said she could shoot him but the vault would still open, and then she would have to decide whether to kill him or fight him for what was inside. She steadied her aim, but he saw the fraction of hesitation in her stance, and he knew that she wanted him alive even if she would never admit it. Perhaps she thought she could still turn him. Perhaps she simply hated wasting life after losing so much of it. When the vault cracked open, the light inside was not gold or silver but white so sharp it carved shadows into the walls. Within, resting on a cradle of black stone, lay the artifact, a sphere no larger than a heart, its surface alive with swirls like storms on an endless sea. Darius felt it pull at him, not with gravity but with promise. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, and Vera lunged. The two collided before the cradle, her rifle clattering away, his knife flashing free. They fought in silence, the artifact humming between them like a third presence, patient and eager. She was faster than he expected, her strikes disciplined, her movements the product of years of practice. He parried, sidestepped, ducked, his body remembering every dirty fight he had survived. Their breaths mingled, ragged and harsh. He cut her arm, shallow but bloody. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, forcing a grunt from his throat. He twisted her wrist and the knife spun away, embedding itself in the cradle with a hiss of scorched stone. They both froze for half a second, watching the artifact tremble as though amused. Then they lunged again. The fight spilled into the vault chamber, sparks from torn panels lighting their struggle. Darius taunted her, asking if she fought for her squad or for herself. She answered with fists and knees, her silence more damning than words. He told her that betrayal was always closer than loyalty, and she spat blood at his feet. He felt the seed Nyla had planted burning under his sternum, slowing his strikes, making him see her not as prey but as someone who had already lost everything and still fought because the alternative was surrender. He hated that seed. He hated that he wanted to let it grow.